following the sacrifices of the animal and the initial anointing and consecration of the priests, then we see in chapter 9 that they actually begin their ministry. Verses 1 to 5. It came to pass on the 8th day that Moses called Aaron and his sons and the elders of Israel. So I want to pause for a second, because the first part of the ceremony on the first day, remember, all the congregation were going to come to the tent of the meeting, the door of the tent, and they were able to see this ceremony of consecration. Now it is 7 days later. We are on the 8th day, and Moses is calling, yes, the high priest and the priests and the elders of Israel. Picking up on verse 2. And he said to Aaron, take for yourself a young bull as a sin offering and a ram as a burnt offering without blemish, and offer them before the Lord. And to the children of Israel you shall speak, saying, take a kid of the goats as a sin offering, and a calf and a lamb, both of the first year, without blemish, as a burnt offering. Also a bull and a ram as peace offerings to sacrifice before the Lord, and a grain offering mixed with oil. For today the Lord will appear to you. So they brought what Moses commanded before the tabernacle of meeting, and all the congregation drew near and stood before the Lord. All right, so he gives the instructions to Aaron, to the priests, to the elders. They get the animals, they come to the door of the tent of the meeting, and now the congregation draws near. And the instruction that Moses gave to them was that now, as they do this sacrifice, the Lord will appear to them. So for the last 7 days, they were doing sacrifices. They were appearing before the Lord, but now the Lord will appear to them. They lived at the tabernacle of meeting for the 7 days. Yet again, another sacrifice. They're still atoning for their sin, because I'm sure during that week there would have been a time that they would have sinned, because the law of God is perfection and no one can keep it. That's why we thank God for Jesus, because he fulfilled it perfectly. And through his sacrifice, we receive the benefits of it. But no one could fulfill it perfectly. So definitely they would have sinned and had to make atonement for themselves again. So here they're ordered to make 5 more sacrifices. They have a kid of the goats, a calf and a lamb and a bull and a ram. Right? And at this time, after they make the sacrifices, they have the promise that God will appear. So they do all the sacrifices. They do with the blood what is necessary. They do with the meat what is necessary. And here we are at verses 22 to 24. Then Aaron lifted his hand toward the people, blessed them, and came down from offering the sin offering, the burnt offering, and peace offerings. Let me pause right there, because now it is Aaron who is doing the sacrificing. When they were in the ceremony of consecration at the beginning, it was Moses doing everything, but now Aaron is doing what he's supposed to do, and his sons are taking part. So we see their priestly ministry actually beginning after these 7 days. Verse 23, and Moses and Aaron went into the tabernacle of meeting and came out and blessed the people. Then the glory of the Lord appeared to all the people, and fire came out from before the Lord and consumed the burnt offering and the fat on the altar. When all the people saw it, they shouted and fell on their faces. So the sacrifice has been done. They have been atoned. God has put his mark of approval on the whole ceremony by allowing his presence to be seen and his fire to consume the burnt offering. And this is just a foreshadow, because also later on we're going to meet Elijah, and Elijah also is going to have sacrifice consumed by the fire of God. And so this is something that we see that God does. He consumes the sacrifice when it is pleasing to him. So here we are. We're at the end of chapter 9. We learned about the offerings for the sacrificial systems of the worship of the people and how they make atonement and how they give God glory and thanks for who he is and what he has done. We see the ceremony for consecration for Aaron, the high priest, and his sons, who will be the priests of God and minister in the tabernacle before the Lord. We see that the Lord has said yes to the sacrifice. He has approved it, and he has allowed his presence to come and his fire to consume the animal that has been placed on the altar. We are in chapter 10. And something happens that may be surprising. I will tell you this, as I was reading through the chapters before, there were such strict instructions as to how the sacrifices were to be handled, what was to be done with the animal, the different parts of the animal. Take your time and actually read through the chapter, and it's very specific about the different body parts and which part, the thigh and the leg and the kidneys and the fat over the kidneys. So there's a lot of detail, a lot of instructions. They are to follow them completely. But here we see in chapter 10, what happens when you do not follow God's instructions completely? Verses 1 to 3. Then Nadab and Abihu, the sons of Aaron. This is the firstborn and the secondborn. Each took his censer and put fire in it, put incense on it, and offered profane fire before the Lord, which he had not commanded them. Let me pause right there. So we see the sons of Aaron that have just been consecrated to the role of priests. Now they come and they go to worship the Lord in a way that he has not commanded. There are a few things that we can see in this verse that I just read. Number one, each of them took a censer and put fire in it. It does not talk about where the fire is from. There were instructions earlier that the fire had to come from the altar. The incense that was supposed to be burned before the Lord had to be burned with the fire that came from the altar. And so we don't know where they got this fire from. And also, it may be that they went into the place where they were not supposed to go and offered fire onto the Lord. Remember, there was a veil before the holy place and the most holy place, and where they were supposed to stand was before the veil. That's where the altar of incense is, and we don't know if that's where they were or they tried to slip behind the veil. Different commentaries say different things, but we know whatever it was profane, and God had not commanded them to do it. So verse 2, so the fire went out from the Lord and devoured them, and they died before the Lord. So let me pause again. We see a few verses before that the fire of the Lord came and consumed the sacrifice. That was the approval of God. That was God happy with what they had offered them. Now the fire is coming and consuming them. He did not ask for this incense. He did not ask for this offering, and the fire was profane. Verse 3, and Moses said to Aaron, this is what the Lord spoke, saying, by those who come near me, I must be regarded as holy, and before all the people, I must be glorified. So Aaron held his peace. Moses explains to Aaron why they ended up dying before the presence of the Lord. Because they must come to God as God has stipulated. And so we see that Aaron, he holds his peace. He doesn't argue, he doesn't mourn, he doesn't lament, and they're not even allowed to later on in the chapter. They cannot do it because they have done something that is an offense to God. So if they mourn for them, it's like if they were siding with Aaron's sons. So this is important. They are seeing right at the outset, right at the start, that they have to take their duties to God seriously and follow his instructions exactly how he wants them to. In this chapter, we are seeing something that is sad. They did not have to die. They just had to obey the voice of the Lord. And their lives are used as an example for every priest afterwards of how they are to honor and serve God. Verse 8 to 11 says, Then the Lord spoke to Aaron, saying, Do not drink wine or intoxicating drink, you nor your sons with you, when you go into the tabernacle of meeting, lest you die. It shall be a statute forever throughout your generations, that you may distinguish between holy and unholy, and between unclean and clean, and that you may teach the children of Israel all the statutes which the Lord has spoken to them by the hand of Moses. Aaron's sons, they offered profane fire before the Lord. They were killed. And now it says in these verses that Aaron and his other sons are not supposed to drink before they go into the tabernacle of meeting. So it may be that the first two sons may have had intoxicating drink, and their behavior was a result of being inebriated. And so God is very clear here. He says, don't let them touch alcohol when they're going into my tabernacle. So the priests needed to be alert and attentive and be able to discern between good and evil at all times. Especially as they're ministering unto the Lord in his tabernacle, they had to be sober. And God ensures that for everybody coming after, that they will be aware of this and that they will know what is required of them. And in this chapter, we continue on. Then Moses made careful inquiry about the goat of the sin offering, and there it was burned up. And he was angry with Eleazar and Ithamar, the sons of Aaron who were left, saying, Why have you not eaten the sin offering in a holy place, since it is most holy? And God has given it to you to bear the guilt of the congregation, to make atonement for them before the Lord. See, its blood was not brought inside the holy place. Indeed, you should have eaten it in a holy place as I commanded. So Moses wants to know why Eleazar and Ithamar didn't eat the portions of sacrifice they were given to eat as the priests. Their father steps in and replies, because the sons apparently followed the example of the father who did not eat the meat because he was mourning the loss of his sons. And as we read the scripture, it seems that Moses was pleased with that answer, and they leave it there. All of this is to show that Moses is taking his responsibility very seriously. As the priests have now been instituted in their roles and this sacrificial system is getting underway, he is checking up on the priests. He's making sure that things are going according to the blueprint of God and that they are doing things according to the specifications of the Lord. So Moses has an important part to play. In this relationship between Moses and the priest, Moses represents like the government. He is God's leader for this time, and he's the one who discerns between good and evil, and the priests represent the priesthood. So we are winding down for this session. We have a few more chapters to go. And the first part of it, we're all about the offerings, the guidelines for the priest, the consecration of the priest, and the consequences to disobeying God's instructions. God continues to release his instructions through Moses to the people as to how the people are to live. The priests are in place, the sacrificial system is in place, the worship is in place. Now we're going to look at their diet, we're going to look at their cleanliness, and even the health of the community. It starts off with the food. Now, if you know anything about the Jewish nation, you would have heard the term kosher. There are specific laws with regards to diet and preparation of food that is labeled kosher, and here's where we see its beginning. God gives these laws to the children of Israel, and it's to the children of Israel, not to all of humanity. He doesn't go into the other countries and tell them they have to eat a certain way. This is for the children of Israel. It's an opportunity for them to demonstrate their obedience to God. God says, to touch this animal, don't touch this animal. And how they obey God will show their heart posture and their level of commitment to God. So it's important that they obey what God is saying, even if they don't understand it or if it doesn't really make sense to them in that moment. Also, with these dietary laws that he gives to them, it causes them to live separated from the other pagan nations. One of the things that you'll see in the Bible, and dare I say even now too, one of the ways that people build relationship and community is around meals. And so as you have meals together, you fellowship, you spend time, you learn about one another, and you deepen bonds. Now, as the Israelites were given these dietary laws were very different from how other nations were eating. They could not share meals. Therefore, they would not deepen bonds and establish relationships with other people. This was part of the separation that God expected from his people and the consecration that he demanded from them. And lastly, the dietary laws that we're about to learn about also were very practical. Okay, this was before modern refrigeration and all of those things. So there would have been different types of mold, different types of insects, different types of bacteria that would have been in certain types of meat. And they would have been more prevalent in certain types of foods. And so by giving them these dietary laws, it's not for them to have less enjoyment in life, but it's for their longevity, their preservation, and their health. So God does this for their good. In a nutshell, any animals with cloven hoofs and who ruminate, who eat their cud, could be eaten. Pigs were not allowed. Also, there were some birds included. Birds who were like predators or scavengers were not to be eaten. Fish that didn't have fins or scales could not be eaten. And as you go through the list, you will see a list of non-kosher food. And this was important for them to know. They would have to only eat the clean food if they wanted to remain clean before the Lord. And he even speaks about how they deal with the carcasses of the animals that are not clean and how they deal with the carcasses of the animals that are clean. Okay, so we're talking about a lot of detail. God mentions insects, which types of insects are clean, such as the locusts, the crickets, and the grasshoppers. They could take that, probably fry it up, season it, and eat it, but the other insects were not able to be eaten, like ants or any kind of larvae or grubs. So God is clear here, right? And even when the unclean animals were dead, they could not be left in the community just to rot or break down. They had to be disposed of outside of the camp. And those who would touch the unclean animals would be unclean themselves. And they would have to go through the ritual of cleansing and have a brief quarantine until they could rejoin their own community. So by outlining these laws about diet, God is also touching the state and the cleanliness of the Israelite home. Within the home, if certain animals weren't brought in, if there were certain procedures that had to be taken place, actual house would be more sanitary. So listen, God is really involved in all the details. So we end up with verses 44 to 45, and we see the Lord's reasoning for these dietary laws. He says, "For I am the Lord your God. You shall therefore consecrate yourselves, and you shall be holy, for I am holy. Neither shall you defile yourselves with any creeping thing that creeps on the earth. For I am the Lord who brings you up out of the land of Egypt to be your God. You shall therefore be holy, for I am holy." The Lord is connecting his instructions, his guidelines, right back to the Exodus. He reminded them that he brought them out of slavery. He brought them out of Egypt for a purpose. He gave them their freedom back so that they were free to be his people. And that involved an adjustment in every area of their lives, including their food. He wants them to be healthy, prosperous, to have longevity, and to have a high quality of life, and also to live in deep communion with one another, reflecting his glory through their behavior.